Thank you, Mr. Speaker. I'm pleased to rise today to speak to Senate Bill S2 to amend the Vehicle Safety Act to empower government to force recalls of vehicles with safety problems. The role of government is, as we know, first and foremost, to protect its people. We cannot protect everyone from everything, and as they say, to defend everything is to defend nothing. However, we certainly should be protecting Canadians from predictable safety issues. I think all members in this chamber and most in the other chamber as well can agree on these principles. Protecting Canadians is the role of all parties and all parliamentarians. That is why this act has been introduced twice in two different chambers by members of two parties. Bill S2 is very close to the bill tabled at the end of 2015 by the Honourable Member from Milton, then the Minister of Transportation. She tabled Bill 662 to provide recall powers to the Minister and the Department of Transportation, impose fines where appropriate, and ensure that Canadians have safer vehicles. Bill S2 was diligently reproduced from this leading legislation by the Senator, and we appreciate his work, the work of the members of the Senate Transportation Committee, and all the witnesses that appeared before them to bring this legislation forward. This bill provides new powers that are not really that new. In fact, if you were to read stories about vehicle recalls in the press, it almost sounds like the government has recall powers already. Surprisingly, though, Canada's federal government lacks recall measures to order manufacturers to recall any vehicle with a defect. According to testimony before the Senate, Canada has the power to order recalls and changes to other vehicles like airplanes and ships, but not to any cars or trucks. What this bill does is create those new recall powers as well as penalties of up to $200,000 per day and makes it the prerogative of the manufacturer, not the dealer, to make repairs. From the testimony, some of the issues that occur when there is a recall will continue, and it can't be fixed by legislation. As any of us who have gone through a recall know, the recall may be ordered, but the parts are not always instantaneously available. I read an interesting article last week, the story of a John Fawcett from Iqaluit and his recalled Jeep with a known defect that abruptly shifts the transmission into neutral while driving. As a new father, this created a major problem for him. His vehicle was unsafe for his family. After some research, Mr. Fawcett discovered that his Jeep was under manufacturer's recall for 4 different issues that were listed on Transport Canada's website. The issue of the abrupt shifting of gears was also listed on the website and described as an unexpected shift to neutral, which could result in a loss of motive power, which in conjunction with traffic and road conditions and the driver's reactions may increase the risk of a crash. Mr. Fawcett accepted that his car needed a bit of work and that Chrysler was responsible for doing this work. This bill will ensure that consumers like John are protected from the potentially catastrophic accidents that can result from manufacturer's defects and authorize the Minister of Transport to order a company to correct a defect or non-compliance in a vehicle or equipment if it is considered to be in the interest of public safety. In addition, there would be the power to order companies to pay the costs of correcting a defect or non-compliance in a vehicle or equipment. These combined order powers are important for potential situations where consumers would be expected to pay for the correction of a defect or non-compliance in a vehicle or equipment. Such a situation would place an unreasonable financial burden on Canadians and potentially place other Canadians at risk should their fellow citizens be unable to undertake the necessary repairs. Mr. Speaker, I will have to agree with my colleague from the Senate chamber and former City of Ottawa Police Chief who summarized this bill as legislation that will strengthen the oversight of the recall process. It will be a big win for consumers and overall for safety of Canadians, end quote. The purpose of Bill S2 is to increase consumer protection and motor vehicle safety in Canada. This is why the previous government brought this bill forward in 2015, why it is before us today, and why I will support this bill. I found it useful to look at some of the parts of the testimony provided by consumer protection groups, vehicle dealers, and manufacturers. First thing that came to me was the interesting insert of the dealers and manufacturers arrangement. The dealer networks noted that some, not all, but some manufacturers were providing poor business support to their dealers. Dealers were left holding costs for vehicles under safety recalls that were not sold to a customer directly, or already, It was left to the headquarters of the car manufacturers in other countries to determine if they would provide help or not. This seems like a poor arrangement and a bad relationships between two businesses. And that I was confident that government can help fix a poor business relationship, and time will tell if this new arrangement to manage recalls between manufacturers and dealers is a good deal for the end user. Because, Mr. Speaker, when this bill was tabled under the previous government, it was all about the protection of consumers. There were no clauses about fixing a lopsided business relationship. The bill was about protecting people who use and operate vehicles daily. Specifically, the bill ensured that vehicle recall notices were sent as soon as possible so that people were aware of potential risks, that manufacturers were required to act on the recall quickly and at the convenience of the customer, not at the convenience of their product cycles, and that manufacturers cover the costs associated with the recalls. This put families first and works at the heart of protecting our regulatory regime. The president of the Canadian Vehicle Manufacturers Association said that, and I quote, "In particular, we support Bill S2 amendments that provide a clear, more rigorous and transparent process for exercising a number of ministerial powers to order, recognition of the rapid pace of technology change through enhanced ability to provide exemptions to standards where new technologies exist," end quote. So we know for the most part the manufacturers agree in principle with many of these measures. So why would they agree? Well, for the American companies, this aligns for the most part with U.S. regulations, and this makes it easier to understand and comply. This bill empowers the Minister of Transport to impose fines on manufacturers who delay or postpone recalls or who do not comply with recall orders. Ian Jack from the Canadian Automobile Association said, and I quote, "The Canadian system is a veritable, if not literal, paper tagger. Bill S2 will give the minister the authority to order a company to issue that recall, to make companies repair a recalled vehicle at no cost to the consumer, and to prevent new vehicles from being sold in Canada until they are repaired. This matches similar legislation that exists in the U.S., finally leveling the playing field for Canadian consumers." So, Mr. Speaker, S2 brings Canadian consumers up to the level of other consumers around the world, at least on measures related to recall notices. And this measure aligns with the harmonization of regulatory issues across the U.S. and Canada. Mr. Speaker, this legislation brings forward the protection of consumers, ensures that Canadian dealer networks are treated fairly, and ensures that our roads and streets have safer vehicles on it. I'm always happy to see some bipartisan cooperation on issues that ensure Canada is protecting its citizen. And I'm always happy to support when Liberals follow the leadership of the previous Conservative government. I'd like to thank the Senator for bringing this legislation forward, and like many parliamentary processes, it ran longer than a single mandate or government. I look forward to working with him and all my colleagues in the House to advance this legislation. Thank you, Mr. Speaker.
Questions and comments? Questions et commentaires? L'honorable député de Trois-Rivières.
Merci, Monsieur le Président. J'ai écouté avec attention le discours de mon honorable collègue. Et bien que je suis d'accord avec lui qu'on attend impatiemment que le projet de loi soit déféré au comité pour qu'on puisse l'étudier précisément dans le moindre détail, si les orientations semblent acceptables et certaines même tout à fait louables, quelle serait, selon lui, la principale lacune oubliée dans S2 sur laquelle nous devrions nous pencher lors de nos travaux?
The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Mr. Speaker, I'd asked the member, there's a phrase in there that the interpreter didn't allow me to hear very clearly on the question. There's something in this legislation that prevents, and I'd missed what that was. If I could just get them to ask that one more time, please.
Alors, peut-être l'honorable député de Trois-Rivières répéter cette phrase. Peut-être l'honorable député.
Avec plaisir, très brièvement, ce que je demandais à mon collègue, c'est d'identifier ce qui, selon lui, était la principale lacune ou le plus grand oubli au projet de loi S2.
The honourable member for Medicine Hat, Cardston Warner.
Thank you, Mr. Speaker, and I thank my colleague for his question. You know, I think there is probably a number of things that if you look at this particular piece of legislation is a carry forward. I think one of the things that when you look at it is Is the government now trying to get into a business relationship fix between manufacturers and dealers, and something they have to deal with? I think that could be an issue that could detract from the intent of this bill, which is to protect Canadians. And I see that as probably the largest gap that exists right at the moment, Mr. Speaker.